Today, we have a very exciting workshop coming for you today with Amit Kothari, who is the CEO of Tallyfy. And the title of the workshop is going to be Process versus Project Management. With me here today is Phil, the CEO and founder of No Code Ops. Phil, if you want to introduce yourself, go for it.
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Phil. I founded No Code Ops, a community for no-code operations professionals around the globe. We put out a newsletter once a week and have a private vetted community that people can apply for on the site. Super excited to be here.
Beautiful. Amit, if you want to introduce yourself, that would be so great.
Yeah, I'm Amit. I'm originally from the UK. I now live in the Midwest in the US, and I'm the co-founder of Tallyfy. And what we do is we automate tasks between people. So we are not RPA, we're not middleware, we're not a project management tool. So I guess we know what we're not, but I guess we'll discover what we are later on today. So there you go.
Love it. Super cool. So Shaf, I've got a bunch of questions. I'm sure you do as well. So maybe we should just jump right on in.
Yeah. So Amit, if you want to share your screen now and start the workshop, that would be amazing. And then once the workshop is done, we will have a Q&A session where everyone, including me and Phil, will be asking a couple of questions. And whoever is interested or have any questions about the tool, about Tallyfy, or about anything in general, please do leave them down in the comment section on the right side. Okay, let's get started.
Mm-hmm. So Amit, maybe if you just want to give a brief overview of just a 2-minute overview of Tallyfy, and then we can just go into the difference between process and project management. That would be awesome.
Absolutely.
Great.
So you can see my screen okay, guys?
Perfectly.
Okay, awesome. So it's a tool that helps run repeatable processes between people. And examples of these are things like onboarding clients, where, say, you win a client, you have to run some repeatable process to make sure that they're onboarded right in order to so that they get the best first impression, which also involves client-facing tasks, as in tasks which are assigned to people outside your company, to your client. So that's an interesting little area of process that we're working on. And then also things like employee onboarding. You hire a new employee, you might have a very long checklist or steps around what needs to be done, like training, all the things you need to do to set them up and get them productive in their first few weeks in your company. So these are just examples of any repeatable process. In marketing, people do use it for QA, like content approvals and checks before they publish them to the wider world. People also use it for engineering, so things like QA for pre-production releases, UX checks, UI checks, updating your product manual, all the things that you might have to do before you hit the button like push to production. Which can be dangerous if you don't do, as we've discovered in the past. So processes are everywhere. That's what we do. We actually integrate with other RPA systems. So RPA is more like a way to run or record a scripted automation of something that you want done and again. We are not an RPA tool. However, a webhook from our end can actually push a signal to another RPA tool to go and do its thing. To us, that tool is a black box. It's like we just tell the tool, hey, it's your turn to do this thing now. Please go do this thing. It does whatever it's going to do in the cloud, whether it's a middleware system like a Zapier or a Power Automate, or an RPA system like all the ones that we know today. Once that's done, it calls back to us. That's called a callback. It just calls back and says, hey, that thing you told me to do, I did it. So that's what we are, and that's how we fit in the space of things.
Awesome.
And so that's, I hope, is there anything else I should cover, do you think, Phil?
No, I think that's awesome. And just kind of diving in on that note, I mean, I remember looking at tools like this in the past and just understanding the difference between process management and project management and how vastly different they are. And then even within process management, automated processes versus human in the loop processes. I'd love to just, for folks out there, right, who are evaluating software on this front or, looking to, understand the difference between the two. I'd love to start with your understanding of what do you consider the difference between process and project?
So let me see if I prepared something for today, so that should be
Great.
helpful to start with. So as a basic summary, a lot of people know this already, so it's worth repeating. A project is something that tends to be unique. It may not be unique sometimes, but it's generally unique. Like, for example, if I'm remodeling my kitchen, that's a project. I'm not going to remodel my kitchen 6 times a week, right? So it's not a process.
I mean, look,
Yeah.
I'm
maybe
guilty.
you're unhappy with your kitchen, but I mean, you'd have to be crazy. But anyway, a very expensive hobby to have.
Yeah.
So then a process, therefore, is repeatable by nature. Now, it does break down. In process, it's not just repeatable as in the end. There's other things involved there. There is a few other things as well. So I've got a small kind of comparison type thing that I tried to knock up today. So an example.
Do you mind zooming in on that?
Yeah, it's a little bit small here. So
much better. Yeah.
There we go. Better? Okay. So projects are great for things that where you don't know it's not predictable. So projects are things where you just knock up tasks as they just show up. And a lot of creative work is project driven. It's the way it is, right? It has to be. But companies that actually are large and end up scaling, as in a non-consulting company that doesn't just do a random ad hoc thing, but repeats it 1,000 times a week and actually has scaled it to 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, that requires a process. Because if you treat everything like a unique project, at some point, there'll be a massive problem. You won't have a consistent outcome. It's so think of like a cooking recipe in the kitchen. When you cook a recipe, it's a process, right? It guarantees a great outcome if you follow the recipe. Your food's not going to taste horrible, right? But if you randomly, uniquely just knock up some cooking and say, oh, look, this is what I cooked today, you're not going to be able to repeat that tomorrow. So a chef will not be able to repeat the same dish in a great restaurant again and again, unless it is a process and a recipe. So that's really the difference, the applicability of a project to just a random quick thing you want to do versus your intentional requirement to actually scale operations is something that requires process thinking. And there is a few other things too. Processes can be compared, like apples to apples.
About that.
So you have process A, you onboarded a client, right? You just onboarded a second client, process B, using the same recipe or process. Guess what you can do? You can compare A to B because basically the tasks are essentially the same, right? So when you do something 1,000 times a month, you can actually run comparisons apples to apples to see the difference between separate runs. Now, we actually integrate to BI tools, BI meaning business intelligence tools, like Tableau and Power BI, we have real-time integrations to all of them. And so what we did, we actually made visualizations in Tableau from fake process data that wouldn't be possible to do with projects. So on that subject, how do you compare processes? You can actually compare things like, I have 1,000 tasks of the same kind.
Right.
Why is this one always late when I don't know, the specific situation is true? And sometimes you can blame people. Like every time Jane does it, she takes 3 times longer than everyone else. Right. But then that's not a right comparison because maybe Jane is so awesome at what she does that she does it at high quality. So be very careful analyzing processes. It's about qualitative outcomes, as in did the job great, not just like did the job as fast as possible, right?
Yeah,
so in the olden
I
days,
definitely remember that from the CX world. Like we would have support agents that would have the fastest time to close a ticket, but like the responses would be super minimal and very cut paste. So yeah, finding the balance is key.
So although you can compare, the questions you ask of those comparisons are critically important. And sometimes there's just issues around timing. Like if someone leaves a task over for the weekend, their whole mean just skews over. It's like you took 3 days to do this, but 2 of those days were Saturday and Sunday. So I'm not technically late, right? Because I don't work at weekends. So it's really hard to compare unless you then clean up the data that have all those.
Right. But it is more possible to compare process data versus project data. And it's not that projects don't have KPIs associated with them, right? Like there's happiness of the client that you're delivering it to, net promoter score, and there's, how fast we're able to deliver it. But I think you get a lot more granular and comparable between processes at almost every step you can do.
Yes. And so that's the subject of comparing, right? For process versus project. There's another concept I want to introduce called marginal gains. And this is a very famous concept. It's also called continuous improvement. So think of a project as very difficult to continuously improve. Think of a process as naturally able to continuously improve. Why is this important? Well, anyone who knows Toyota, the car company, they invented a system called Lean and Six Sigma and all that stuff back in the day in manufacturing that helps them continuously improve manufacturing, reduce defects, reduce mistakes, improve cycle time, etc. And I'm actually a Six Sigma myself. That's how I started this company, in the realization that if you improve 100 things by 1%, the impact is ridiculous. I'll give you a real example. James Clear has this example of the British cyclist team. I'm British, so it's an example.
I love, by the way, anyone listening, Atomic Habits by James Clear. Couldn't recommend it anymore. One of my favorite books.
Great book. And this is a real story. The British cyclist team completely sucked. Like, completely sucked. Like, no medals, no nothing. Just never won anything. So this guy comes along and says, okay, well, I can't just there's no silver bullet here. I have to change 100 things to improve this team, right? So he treated it like a process, like an example. He took the bike seats and made them more comfortable by rubbing alcohol on the tires. Who cares? Tiny thing, right?
Right.
But what if you did 100 of these tiny things? Well, their aggregate outcome across all of them is an amazingly better team, just by upping 100 things. So a process allows you to do this. Because every time you run a race, it's a process, right? Make sure I do these 50 things before the race starts. And every professional golfer in the world, and I'll show you this in a minute, every sportsman or sportswoman that's made it in the world thinks of everything as a process. They don't just turn up and go, oh, I'm here to play some golf, right? They literally turn up and say, in my mind, all night I've been preparing and I know how these shots are going to go. They've already done all their homework.
Yep.
They can see winning in their minds. And when they see that win, they win, right? And it's only through that preparation that they get there. So a few of these examples are here. Another example, they got the athlete to bring their own pillow and their own mattresses to hotels. Crazy, right?
Yeah.
But I'm a lot more comfortable. People are more comfortable sleeping on their own mattress, right? If that means you get a better night's sleep as a cyclist, great, better chance of winning, right? Okay, it's a small thing, but they painted the inside of a tea truck white so that they can spot little bits of dust. Again, amazing. Stupid, tiny detail, right? Who cares about this? But if you made a list of 100 of these, it's incredible. So the theory of marginal gains essentially says that these little gains, if you continuously improve a process, are incredibly compounding. Right? 100 things changed like this result in a huge betterment of the entire thing. It's kind of like how Starbucks just keep tuning their cappuccinos to be better and better and better from feedback, right? Mm-hmm. And ultimately, they have the world's best coffee. But they can repeat that 1 million times an hour. Just think how crazy that is. A barista is not some creative genius that just knocks up a coffee. They follow a recipe, right? And that recipe is followed millions of times an hour across every Starbucks across the whole world, right?
So let me ask you this, Amit. I'd love to hear some examples. I mean, I know you work with a ton of companies at Tallyfy on this front, right? I'd love to hear some examples of ways that you've seen these small 1% changes, specific examples of how internal operations folks are applying this at their companies.
Sure. Let me give you some concrete examples. So there's two things to mention about processes. They're quite hard to do. So what I've just said here, back in the day, only enterprises could do it. Only a company like Toyota could turn around and say, hey, we are doing continuous improvement, right? How does your average person do it? How does your average person create a process, start improving it continuously, right? So the examples I'm about to show you are the average person, as in some people are not even code savvy, right? And I'll show you they're sort of citizen developers. They might know a little bit of stuff around conceptual aspects, but otherwise not much else. So there's two stories here. One is a transit company. Literally, they run all the trains, the buses, and all the transportation in this city called Alexandria, which is near the
Virginia is by the capital.
In Virginia, yeah. So I think it's also near the Pentagon, the Metro Rail. So this guy Evan turns up and says, "Oh, I want this." This is his team, by the way. I want to create workflows for my financial functions. So purchasing workflows. In their case, they're also legally required to follow processes when they purchase things. It's not just an optional thing. They have to follow a process, right? Now, he asked IT, can I do this in some crazy old ERP system? I think it was SAP or Oracle or something like that. They were like, yeah, it will take 3 years and it will cost $5 to $10 million. 5 to 10 million and 3 years, right?
Sounds about right for the legacy IT/government world.
It's very much an ERP, style thing. So he turns up, he signs up, and within 35 minutes, with an M, right? Minutes, he literally creates this screenshot right here that you're seeing. So these are literally his processes. These are live. These are real. They literally run all their purchasing through these processes that you're seeing on the screen. So, and to give you an example, when they purchase, they're very capital intensive. They run trains and buses and stuff. So they spend millions of dollars a week on tires and electric generators and batteries and God knows what, right? So everything goes through these processes: purchase requisitions, travel expenses, non-travel expenses. His staff submit conference and training requests through the system as well. And he created all of these within minutes, like just knocking them out step by step, without flowcharts, without stress, without mess, using just if this, then that rules, which again, only processes can do. You can't have those things in projects because projects don't collect form fields. They don't collect data. So you can't have if this, then that rules, right? Whereas finance is full of and actually this is an example of if this, then that rules, which are only possible in processes. He has to get 3 quotes. And the one that's approved, he goes through and he provides documentation on it. And then every department in the company, you see where it says HR, planning, marketing, operations, safety, everyone has to approve that purchase before it's actually purchased. Think how would you do that by email? How would you do that in Excel, right? It's just hopeless.
Yeah. Lots of Excel drop downs and things that people edit when they're not supposed to. Shaf, I just want to give you a moment, Shaf. Do you have questions on this front?
No, I don't have any questions, but I did learn about this in my graduate school. And it was mostly along the lines of assembly lines. Yes. And we learned about a case study on Ford, the motor company, and how they kind of have process engineers to actually design all the assembly lines and see what they can improve on and stuff like that. So when you mentioned the 1% change will definitely make so much more change in the long run, that is so true. So I don't have any questions, but I'm it's definitely validating all the things that I've learned in the past.
Yeah. And Shaf, I'm thinking about I'm listening to this. I'm just man, I'm so excited to more formalize and then do 1%, gains and changes around our onboarding process for new members in the community. There's so much we can do there that I'm super jazzed about.
Yeah, it's sparking ideas already in me. Yeah. So this is amazing. Looking forward to more.
It gets much more interesting than this. When you so this is not that interesting. This is just table stakes. Who cares about this stuff, right?
But let's go deeper.
When you go deeper. So first of all, people use flowcharts to express conditions, if yes, go this way, if no, go this way, right? So if you convert that into rules, which many are just called if this, then that rules. So in this case, Evan has a rule: if this purchase is above $100,000, we need 3 quotes. That's actually a legal policy for this. If you spend anything above that, we need 3 quotes. We can't just buy it, right? You have to get quotes, and so on and so forth. Now, what's interesting is the continuous improvement part. How do you actually do it? How do you actually physically continuously improve? Now, comments. Now, in project management, I think the disruption of project management will eventually become a hybrid of process and project management, which is where we're heading towards, right? And then this world of RPA and bots and all that will come along as well behind it, a fun little...
Will you explain RPA really quick to folks that don't know what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. my one sentence explanation using this example that you're seeing on your screen is one of these steps is say not done by a person. Okay, so you've got all these steps, see all these tasks that you've got on the screen, right? They're done by people. Now, say one of them is really boring, like provide vendor documentation, step 3. See that?
Yep.
Okay, let's just say there's an opportunity to go automate, like go pick up some research somewhere by API or something, do some other stuff that's scripted and known, pre-known, and bring it back. So provide vendor doc is like a research task. If someone invented some service that just you give it some input, it does some research, and it just spits back some output, right?
Yep.
All we see RPA as is instead of assigning a human, assign a bot.
Yep. And just for anyone that hasn't heard the term before, it stands for robotic process automation.
Mm-hmm. And we're agnostic to any automation system. That includes middleware. So I want to just distinct here 2 things here. Middleware is things like Zapier and Power Automate. They move data from app to app, right? But it's very hard to automate complete processes like this using those things.
Yep.
If you look at this example here, these are all done by human beings. I am not going to make a $1 million purchase decision because Zapier told me to, right? Like it literally has to be human eyes on this, right? There's no way. So that's an example of what middleware does. It's still a small segment.
Sure.
It's just, you can only automate some of these tasks. For example, making phone calls, sending emails. There's no robot that can do that, right? So most of these things are still...
Well, there are, but not to the level that you might want.
I think the quality will suffer. Something in the end will suffer, and eventually that will have client experience repercussions. And also, people don't want to be automated out, because when you are client-facing, I mean, there's a reason why baristas in Starbucks are not robots, right? Because you don't want to get a coffee from a robot. So it's not. So there is a real need for people always, and I think that it's a very limited set of applications on some of this.
God, you know what that reminds me of? Do you ever hear the case study on Betty Crocker? Which is like when I'm around, I think it was cake batter. So Betty Crocker, they started with like pancakes or whatever, and they made these like instant pancakes, super easy, dehydrated egg, like all the stuff is in it. Boom, add water, mix it up, you're done, right? You get your, you heat it up, you get your pancakes. Mm-hmm. However, they tried to do the same thing with cake batter and failed miserably. People are like, what? Like, you can make a cake so fast. Like, why wouldn't people want this? And the reason was because people think a cake is like a special thing that you're like putting love and work into. And so all they did was remove the dehydrated egg from it. So people were forced to add their own eggs, and then boom, completely changed the cake mix market.
Wow. Invention is just incredible. And so there's 2 things I want to cover before we get further on process versus project, the core of this thing, right?
Let's do it.
We'll cover how to actually improve in a second. But when you have processes, you can real-time track instances of them. So with Evan's example, he's got 3 purchase requisitions running. See that screenshot there?
Yep.
One's an antenna, one's a bus cylinder, one's whatever, right? Yep. So if there's 1,000 running, you can actually track them. He can say, show me every purchase requisition running right now. Again, very hard to do with projects because each is like a unique thing, right? Here, they're all comparable. So you have a progress bar. Because you can only have a progress bar for something with a preset list of tasks. I
guess you can have a progress 20%. Bar for something that like you have in Asana or, like a project management tool, but it's irrelevant. You can't compare apples to apples. I mean, you could always be adding more tasks. So process bars are kind of irrelevant.
Yeah. So it's only when you know the whole thing that you can have a progress bar.
Yep.
Right. If you don't know the whole thing, it's just a fake progress bar. It's not even representative, right? You just keep adding tasks to like, oh, I'm not done yet, right? So your progress bar never moves up. So it's not going to work with that approach. Second thing is crowdsourced improvement. The really interesting part of this, the invention we've created around this is, say I'm doing a process and I have an idea to improve it. Remember we talked about continuous improvement and marginal gains, right? Mm-hmm. I'm the person running this process right now. As in, I'm not stupid, right? I'm doing this work every day, 20 times a week or whatever it is, right? So I can actually comment to the process owner. So commenting is where collab and chat stuff comes in. But unlike Slack, which is just a comment that goes into space and no one cares, right? You can actually make a comment like this. Watch. We need one more item on the checklist above. And then I'm making my suggestion here, XYZ, whatever that is. Okay. So this is my idea for continuous improvement, as in I'm doing this every day. I think we should change the master process here, right? So it's like, if Starbucks is watching people drink cappuccino, somebody gives them feedback, there's too much sugar in this, right? They go back to the drawing board and say, let's slightly adjust the sugar now in the recipe, right? So that's marginal gains. That's the thing you need to do. Well, how do you do it? You see here, there's a type, a blocker or an improvement. If you say improvement, something magic happens. It's not just a comment. What happens is it's a comment that floats up into the master process, the blueprint, as we call it, the template. It goes up to the process owner that sort of flags them to say...
Right, this is like a run of the process. This is like an individual instance named after something running through it. For instance, buy a car, buy a thing, whatever. Yeah. But this floats up to the actual blueprint.
Yeah, and sorry, let me backtrack here for a second. A blueprint is the recipe or a definition of a process. So here we've got all these blueprints. In customer success, this is how we onboard every client, right? This is our template. So if you guys run 5 webinars a week, this is how we onboard people into a webinar. I'm just making that up, but let's just say it's the process close to your heart, right?
Sure.
So here's all your steps. This is how you do it, right? Here there's commenting in chat, but we're not calling it comments. We're calling it improvement ideas. See that? So the actual improvement ideas come from people either designing the process, like say a master chef contributing to a recipe, right? Or the people actually running the process, as in the people literally on the production line, I think the chef said, right? Who literally are doing the thing every day.
Yeah.
And they have an idea and no one listens to them, right? Yep. They're actually doing this work every day.
Yeah, I cannot stress how important it is to, whether it's through this or through any way, like systemically getting information from people on the ground doing the thing every day. So important because they know what needs to be solved usually. But very often they're either not listened to or they don't have an opportunity to speak up, or they've just like never talked to management in certain capacities before. So they don't even know they have the ability to, or that they can, or even if they could, how would they? So, making that an option for folks and making that widely communicated, I think is so important. Amit, we have some questions from the audience. Jeff, do you want to ask these questions and who they're from?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Rachel asked about how do the approvals work?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing in terms of like the different departments and stuff like that.
Exactly. So I just made a quick blueprint right here, a simple purchase approval. I want to buy something. How does the approvals work for that? So first thing I want to add here is, so you know how a recipe has ingredients? I need to prepare my ingredients before I cook my recipe, right? So the first question would be like a text box, like what are you buying, right? And then the next question is how much would it cost? Just making that up, like how much, right? Now the approvals would be different based on how much it costs. So if it's less than let's just say it's less than $1,000, there's a separate set of approvals. If it's more than $1,000, there's actually more things you need to do. So what we do is there's a step builder right here. So you click on approval, you just click this and you say manager approval. Okay, so that happens for everyone all the time. A manager needs to approve. Let's make another step type here. Again, call it an approve reject step. And now say CFO approval. Okay, so but the CFO doesn't care about things less than $1,000, right? So we go to rules down here. If how much is that should be over 1,000. I just mistyped over there. Is more than 1,000, then show this. So that's literally an approval in 60 seconds, right? So I can obviously add more approval steps, but let me go launch this process. So launching is me running this recipe, running this process for a specific approval. Okay. So I want to buy a coffee machine for the office. Okay. What are you buying? Coffee machine. Can someone please approve it? How much? It's above 1,000. launch. Now, guess what? The manager approval shows up because that always shows up no matter what. So manager can reject, approve, or comment. Like, can you make sure it's Nespresso or whatever you want to say. You can
And
also
I'm assuming you can also have form fields that are structured and required before someone can approve as well, correct?
So you can collect information that's conditional.
Yep.
And then if they reject, something else can happen, like go for some other flow. But here I'm just going to hit approve even. And now CFO approval shows up. And now this is very interesting in automation. We believe that all automation needs to explain itself. As in, why did this show up? Which is the craziest thing about bots. Something happens, but you don't know why.
Yep.
So we have a user called
key.
It's so key, that explainability in AI and in bots, right? So we have a bot. You see down below in the comment, the bot made a comment. I showed up this task because the how much was above $1,000.
So cool.
So it's like saying to you,
such a little thing. But
it's a little thing.
So long.
It's like, hey, the CFO approval showed up, but it showed up because of this reason.
I love it.
In processes, and it's not possible in projects, so there is no real automation. But in processes, explainability is key.
Yeah.
And if you describe to someone why this has shown up, it's like, oh, we're just changing the sugar in these cappuccinos. I'm more interested in why. Why are you doing that? Because 50 people complained that blah 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 blah, right? So in this case, it's not a complaint; it's a rule that's actually triggering. And so you can have these automations, and this is task automation now, what I just created right here, okay? And it can go on to any size of information collection. For example, imagine you ask the manager, is this a dangerous type of purchase? Like, does this purchase require health and safety approval? Again, I'm just making that up, right? But is this the kind of thing where we also need health and safety to approve as well? Well, with a coffee machine, maybe not. But if you're buying something dangerous, then maybe yes, right? So I'm going to add a new task here, another approval. Our head of security has to approve as well, okay? But again, this person only cares about this if what you're buying is actually dangerous, right? So does this purchase require H&S approval? Is yes, then show this.
Very cool.
Now, all of a sudden, what I've made is something like you would in a flowchart, like do this,
right? But it's active.
But it's active. It's real, and I can obviously it's documented, so I can see it. Here's
the fun part. Fun question, and then we have another question from the audience for you. But could you pull a flowchart style thing out of this?
You can, yes. We're working on that next. The trouble is that we've always found flowcharts. We actually created, Salesforce had a no software thing a while ago.
Yeah.
The whole foundation of Salesforce was this logo, no software.
No software, yeah. So you guys have no flowcharts.
They're called no flowcharts. Man. It's a little aggressive, I'll have to say.
But you might have to break it.
There are problems with just making anything flowchart based.
Yeah.
It looks pretty. It's a mess in real life.
Oh, yeah.
But
it'd be cool to extract it because leadership loves their flowcharts. They love them.
Yep.
And they're good for documentation, but only if they're kept updated. So,
right.
Fun challenge for y'all. Shaf, do you want to ask the next question from the audience?
Yeah, so the next question is from Rahul. So he asked, should projects be done as a process? Example, building one website is a project. So building websites for others should be a process?
I think you should start with the project and then make that a process. So in the process, we talked about continuous improvement, right? So you just start doing it. You just start knocking out it's like you start cooking something random, right? And you discover, oh, you know what? I want to cook this again tomorrow. This is so good. And it's at that point it becomes a process. So I think it's that you just start doing it and you learn how 80% of it is done, right? And then you decide, you know what? I'm going to have to do this 5 times this month. Hey, guess what? That's an opportunity to make a process, right? Yep. So it's almost like project first, maybe just for learning purposes and just to see how to do something, and that evolves. So I'd say it has a role, but beyond a certain team size or a certain company size, it's just, and I think that's the biggest problem with small businesses. They don't think this way. They just buy Basecamp or some random project tool, start using it like Asana or Trello or something. Before they know it, they have 10 people. And then they're like, oh, John is supposed to be doing it this way, but he's not doing it this way. What a pain. These pain points start at 10 to 20 people.
Yep.
When people kind of say, you should have done it this way. We told you how to do it. You should have done it this way. No, I'm doing it my way. Thanks.
Yep.
Well, if 10 people do everything their way, how the heck are you going to scale this company? Right? And what if that person with all the knowledge in their heads of how to do something leaves your company? What are you going to do then?
Yeah.
You're screwed, right? If you've got nowhere written down of how this person does what they do, you are screwed. Like you're totally, completely reliant on one person. So,
and I think knowing, look, projects have their place in the world, right? But I think knowing first whether you're starting to, build out projects or you're building out processes, and then just knowing the difference between the two and knowing the pros and cons of each, depending on, of course, like what you're looking to do, it really helps you find the right tools for the job because it's part of digging into the problem a little bit more. So knowing, like I remember we were using a project management tool at first when we had like an MVP for client onboarding or agent onboarding at Compass. We're just using Rike, like a project management tool, just to start, and like quickly just ran into so many limitations because it's not built for repeatable processes, right? But in the same world, for like a creative process, like me being a web designer working with a client, like I may not want to. It may not be a process, maybe a long drawn out kind of project. There may be process elements to it, and I think that's where the two hybrids, can kind of interact with each other, which I think is really interesting. Because look, if I'm a web designer, there may always, like a no-code MVP builder, right? There may always be 10 things I do when setting up a Bubble account for somebody. Building the actual thing is changing every single time. So those tasks are changing. So yeah, I'm very interested in the future of where all of this goes. Amit, before we open up the floor for any questions from the audience, that if anyone wants to pop in live and ask any questions, any kind of final thoughts from you? And then anyone in the audience, feel free to raise your hand if you want to come up and ask a question via video.
I just want to comment that you should start doing things that probably don't scale initially, only for the learning experience. But if it's so hard that it's impossible to scale, you could probably decide to drop it. Like if you're ambitious and you want to build a company, don't do incredibly like niche things that just only one person can do, because that's just a natural bottleneck, right? You need to think of like a franchise does. There's a reason why McDonald's and Starbucks have scaled, right? Because anyone can just set them up and just anyone can run them, right? So for those ambitious folks amongst you, especially even if it's in a company, you don't have to be like an entrepreneur. Like if you're in a 500-person company and you need this to work across everybody, you need to think in the same way as well. So it actually applies for any scale of person or problem. This applies for folks inside a big company as well as for entrepreneurs. So that's the last comment. Just, any questions? Otherwise, we could cover other things too. So I just open this up to questions if you want to.
Yeah, for sure. Shaf, we have anyone who raised their hand from the audience?
Not right now, but I do want to open the floor for anyone who's interested in asking any type of questions in terms of like process management, Tallyfy, the platform, or anything in general.
Cool. We just got one. So Shaf, do you want to go ahead and ask that and who it's from?
Yeah. It's from Aline. I was wondering if you're interested in coming on stage to ask the question yourself. And for Raul as well. I'm going to try to invite Aline.
Thanks for your question, Aline. If you're not able to jump on the stage, I could address it now. Maybe there's a microphone or something issue at your end.
All good. So just for everyone to hear. Wait, I think there she is. Hello.
I made it.
You did it.
I actually have a question. I'm absolutely interested in project versus process improvement, management and improvement. And I was actually curious to know if you have any other further reading to suggest beyond what you already mentioned. Because
I think,
this is a daily preoccupation for me, and
yeah,
I really need to go deeper.
yeah. I think that there's a lot of heavy text in this area, especially in Six Sigma, which is a bit too heavy. I mean, a Six Sigma black belt is an actual qualification, and I actually did it, and it takes like 2 years. So this is doing a university degree. So there is like the easy reading, which is like your marginal gains type of book and just understanding the concepts. And frankly, Aline, I think that's probably enough to understand 80 to 90% of the core concept, right? The rest of it with Six Sigma and all that stuff, you can read it, you can go into it, but it's statistically heavy. As in, you are literally doing analytics at that point, trying to see the difference between processes and delta variations and standard deviations and stuff like that. So it's not that interesting to me, the 70s and 80s stuff. The other piece of reading is just around the concepts of how to write a process. You'd be surprised that people don't actually know. I asked someone the other day, a client, what do you think a process is? And they said, oh, printing this thing and putting it in the mail. That's my process. But nobody's ever defined what this word actually means, right? And so I think you should reword the word process into the word procedure. A procedure is much more precise. It says, here's a step-by-step list of things, like a recipe. So we've actually stopped using the word process, and we just use procedure. And actually in the app itself, it says create procedure. So this actually forces that kind of thinking. The other thing is like people don't know how to make flowcharts. They don't know how to make rules, like if this, then that type stuff. So there's probably an opportunity for an e-course or a very simple bite-sized 1 hour course that, frankly, I'm waiting for someone to create that, just like a 101.
We'll create it together, my friend.
I think it's worth creating because it's just it's like when you encounter Zapier for the first time, core concepts. What is this thing? Why do I need it? You don't need to have a degree. You just need to have 20 minutes to just sit down and just look at the basics.
Are there any specific books on marginal gains that you recommend?
I think there's similar concepts everywhere, but Atomic Habits is obviously one of them. But I think that psychological books around how to get people to do things are of most interest to me now. There's a thing called Promise Theory that I met the guy in Silicon Valley who actually founded Promise Theory. He's a British guy, and it's the idea that you promise someone something, and they have to actually do what they promised. So instead of tasking someone, which sounds boring, like, oh, Philip, can you do this task? And Philip's like, am I your slave? No, I don't think so. So it's just a different way of framing what a task is. I think I'm tired of this word task. I think in a way it's a heavy loaded word. It implies that I am commanding someone else and telling them to do something, which sometimes that's necessary, right? But a collaborative world, we talk together and you make me a promise that you'll do this by Thursday, whatever that something is, right? Which basically is a task, right? So we're trying to reframe automatic reminders because I think that's another problem too. People promise things and they don't deliver, right? So if a task wasn't a task with a deadline, but it was a promise with side effects, things feel different and sound different, right? So I think Nudge is it Malcolm Gladwell, Nudge and things like that. Those are interesting books as well around how motivation works around these things. And the final thing I want to say is that ultimately what we're going towards as Tallyfy is, although this is a people-driven app, it's tasks that are done for you is the future. Tasks that I don't even have to do, they're just done for me. That's the future. Now, I don't mean virtual assistants there. I mean, like, that's more getting into, like, automation, that kind of stuff. But I think RPA is too heavyweight right now. Like, even the word RPA is just an enterprise thing. UiPath and all these things. So what the future is, what is the consumerization of RPA? Like, what does it look like for your average person? And that's what I am truly excited about in 2022. we're building something that your average person can record step by step. Like, here's a boring thing I don't want to do 20 times a day. Record it, pass through variables in it, and here's the best bit. You can watch it being done. That's the biggest thing missing in automation. Watch the automation being done, right? With Zapier.
Shortcuts on the iPhone are I think a good foray into the consumer world doing
it kills
stuff.
me. Like, with RPA and Zapier, you set the automation, then you can't see it running. You can't see it, right?
Well, stay tuned.
Maybe you can, right? But you guys have a Roomba, thing that cleans your house, the robot that cleans your house. Is it so satisfying to watch it clean your house?
Yeah.
Because it's just doing this automated thing, right? I think the future of automation is it's like a fast forward button on the old video players, where you can watch something being done, but much faster, like 5 times faster. But think of the satisfaction as you hold a cup of coffee, right? And you just press a button that says like, oh, go and do this for me, right? And you watch your screen, your mouse just go boom, 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 boom on your screen, and something just happens. And that saved you all those clicks and all that time. And you are looking at it, which also leads me to the last concept in automation people don't like is trust. I'm not going to automate something if I don't trust it's going to be done right. If I can watch it being done, I'm going to be much happier because I can see it being done in front of me. Right? If I ask a chef to cook me a recipe, they go to some kitchen and I don't even know what they're doing, I'm not going to trust the food. But if they're literally cooking it in front of me, I can see it being cooked. I can see it, right? I know that they're not messing up. It's just visible. So I think the future is this hybrid between automation you can't see and automation that's incredibly useful, but you can actually see it working in front of you. Kind of like you can see your Roomba cleaning your house and feel that, So there's no book for that to your question, Aline, but it's something that's still cutting edge.
You just gave us a library of stuff. So, Aline, I hope that was helpful. And it definitely seems like with no code ops and like with this conversation, you've definitely found your tribe.
Yeah, I'm so excited about this. But the piece of tech we're building around this is extremely difficult.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
That was really insightful.
We are looking at building a Zapier killer and an RPA killer at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah. And the reason it's a Zapier killer is that it runs in a browser.
Stay tuned, y'all. I love it.
Yeah. With Zapier, you need accounts to authenticate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Thank you, Lynn, for your question. I do have another question here in the comment section, and I'm going to invite Raul on stage if you will. But his question is really around how about training? Can Tallyfy be used to train staff?
Yep. Raul, that's a great question. It's actually one of our top 2 use cases. It's part of employee onboarding, I believe, and training staff. So instead of making a training manual, and maybe I'll wait for your...
I'm here. I just don't have emails right now.
Oh, you're all good. Hey, Raul.
No worries.
Hey, guys. Thank you for taking the time to share. It's really amazing. I have lost track of what you were doing, but I'm really impressed with your work.
Yeah, we're just trying to rethink what's out there. We have to differentiate. It's a requirement for a company like us. So basically, on what you're saying, training staff, you can document stuff in wikis and in all kinds of systems today, right? You can type up training. I think that the big problem is the accountability part, Raul. Maybe you already have tried typing up content for training or making videos for training your staff already. Have you already tried that, but you found it's not effective or there's some issue?
Well, it's more about documentation when it comes to development. And what I noticed, and I'm bringing up this question because you mentioned the scenario when somebody leaves, right? And I was just talking to somebody that I have a developer that has been with me for about 3 years, and he has done a lot of the HTML and CSS code. If he leaves, there are a lot of things that he will take with him, not just the code, but also all the training and grooming him into doing things in a specific way. So obviously the process that you have, the process tool is amazing. It's really straightforward. But I'm wondering what happens when you have tasks that are more subjective, let's say evaluating the quality of design, right? So you talk to your staff, your members, and they learn how to distinguish one thing versus the other. If something is above $1,000, that's a very easy thing. You have it. But when there is some further consideration that you teach someone, I'm wondering if your tool has ways to capture that type of consideration. Then before you allow somebody to jump into the process, you had to train them. So I don't know if you have that, or if it's still something that still belongs to a wiki or to a video.
I think you should break this problem down into micro and macro. So the macro is someone new coming in and just like, how does everything work? Like just lay of the land, you know? But the most interesting part is the micro, because if you find points in the code or this work that you say this person has done, the most complex parts are the ones you should care most about. Like it's like with anything in life, like the most complex are the things that will occupy 80% of the pain, right? It's the Pareto principle type thing. So you can document everything and you'll be here for the next year trying to do that. Or you can ask yourself, if this person leaves, I don't want to know everything they did. It's like, they don't need to teach me how to boil an egg. I know how to boil an egg, right? Like that's just, everyone knows that. But is there something incredibly unique that only they know? Like, what is the specific thing, the micro thing that they know that I have to grab and get them to show me, or at least record even with Zoom or Loom or something? So I think if it sounds like for training, you either want to pass this on or you want to understand it yourself, Raul. So both are different scenarios. If you want to pass it on, you need to string it together in a sequence somehow. And that's the thing, like 50 videos won't make sense to someone new. But 50 videos string together in like, they're in this order and this is what they're about. Context around the whole thing would help. So in your case, the fear seems to be loss of knowledge, which is a great start, right? Sometimes when we serve mid-sized companies, it's not so much loss of knowledge. It's actually the tasking between people. That's the pain. Like, I don't even know that so-and-so. I'll explain to you what I mean, Raul. Maybe, and I'm not sure if this is your context, but you should start by documenting what your developer has done, obviously. That's the number one thing. But the pain that we see in process management are actually, they're different. They're more like asking someone, are you done yet? Like the actual interplay. Now, please remember that the cost is not things. The cost is time, right? People cost at least $44 an hour, I think, is the average wage in the US here. So imagine all that time wasted if it's a day a week, and it can be a day a week, of just asking people about status for things. So if you see it as documenting things, yes, that's the first step. But then the next step is, okay, can I also automate the handover between so-and-so and so-and-so? The actual task flow between people of who's doing what. Then you really get to the kind of mature end of process management, in my opinion. So
it makes sense. Thank you.
I also just put in this in the chat 2 tools that are really good at knowledge capture and sharing that can be laid into processes. But I think one of the biggest challenges, Raul, of documentation is ease of creating documentation. And the lower the barrier to entry to creating documentation for folks, the more of it you capture, the more they don't have to leave their workflow to create it. And so that's why I just happen to love these 2 tools on that front. But what's great is once you capture that knowledge, you can then be the author of, okay, how does this look in a process, if that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Philip.
Yeah.
And Raul, the last point on that, and Philip too, is that all these tools, they help you document step by step quite easily, but they seem to be in a format that you can't use to automate in the future. Like,
correct.
It's for documentation purposes only, not
Yes.
to actually, with RPA, RPA actually runs it. It actually does it for you, right?
And these, it's just mainly about like capturing wiki content that's like really hard to capture when people aren't using it. So, you know, to record your clicks, or, it can like help point somebody around, to when they're doing something, add context. But for instance, like in a process, I would have a button that goes, okay, launch the Tango or launch the Minerva nose at this point to like go through this thing and then show us the result, right? So I think there's a world for both like traditional documentation tools that result in traditional documentation as well as like active process workflows. I think they live really nicely together.
Yeah, and then there's all that stuff in between, and then ultimately at the top you have RPA, which is the kind of everything you recorded actually done for you.
Yeah, it just does it, right? So,
yeah.
Well, Amit, this was incredible. I just learned so much, and we've talked for hours before, and I still learned a ton. So this was really cool. So yeah, thanks for joining us. How can people find out more about Tallyfy or get in touch with you should they have other questions?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, so look me up, Amit Tallyfy. But really, just a website, tallyfy.com. There's a free trial, 14 days, so you have nothing to lose, just playing with it. And there's if you want to speak in person, this is the link, tallyfy.com/Amit. It's my Calendly to schedule a meeting. So just go ahead and schedule a time. Not this month, but maybe next month. Actually, I'm in Mexico for 2 weeks, so maybe not 2 weeks in December. But other than that,
cool.
It's the place to go. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much. Shaf, any sign off from you?
No, but thank you so much for joining us today, Amit. And I thank everyone else for chiming in with questions and all the insightful, details that you mentioned in this workshop. I really do appreciate it. Until next time, you guys, thank you so much for joining No Code Ops today.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye now.
Bye.
See you guys.